Enthusiasm and curiosity and exploration and a sense that there's so much to be discovered and to play with. It does not interest me to be a chronicler of the evil side of things. My parents were Eastern European intellectuals into music. We had our own group of Latvian singers, piano players, artists of the old school, and my aunts painted and took art lessons and painted flowers, and we would have their work on our walls. And this is a photograph of my dad in the Latvian cavalry in 1934. As a child, I did live in a place that was bombed, and we would flee. We fled from Latvia because the Russians were on our tail, and we were actually informed that intellectuals, which my parents were, and uncles and stuff, were going to be hunted particularly. We all fled to Germany, and we were placed in these refugee camps, which were usually old bombed out castles or little huts that had been built as barracks. We usually had about 18 to 20 per room, and we huddled because the windows were bombed out. I was a fairly sickly kid, so I was usually left alone to roam these castles or whatever. At the barracks, we actually had chickens, and we had guards around the perimeter, but we had our little gardens and our chickens and things. That is a drawing done in the refugee camps in the 40s by a good friend of my father's who had studied at the Art Academy in Riga. And this is a portrait of my father. And this is his naturalization paper. That was in 1955. I graduated from Sacramento City College with an Associate of Arts in math, and so I just went on to UC Davis, being the nearest institution of upper learning that did a 4-year degree, and enrolled in the mathematics department. It was a time that one was still required 3 things to graduate, and one was, of course, American history, another was a foreign language, and the third was a studio art course. It happened that Dr. Richard Nelson, the head of the Davis Art Department, had been recruiting artists to teach at Davis, and he had asked William T. Wiley, who was a very famous, established artist. And then they had the guest instructors from New York, like Elaine de Kooning and Robert Kulick. Wayne Thiebaud would, take out a palette, and he would say, you put down this much white paint, and you put down this much of the other paints in a certain order, and, we will be going through pointillism and whatnot. But Wiley didn't do that. He just kind of let you loose. The studio contained, plastic skeleton and a few cow skulls and lots of vases and bottles and dried flowers and all this stuff. And he just kind of found a spot in the middle of the room and piled all this stuff in various manners and walked out with the words, "Draw that." He would always make very favorable comments about my stuff, and he would bring in books from his personal library of artists that he liked, which were, as varied as James Ensor and Antonio Gaudi and Albert Pinkham Ryder and Clifford Still. And so I asked my counselor to change my major to art. And I proceeded to enroll in every course I possibly could. It was a true awakening. I wanted to see the Greek temples. I wanted to see the Forum. I wanted to see the caryatids. I wanted to see the Frank Lloyd Wright buildings. I wanted to see the paintings at the museums. All of these diverse ingredients kind of shaped me into distilling the animal and the absurd into what I call beasts. This is 2007. In 2005, I chose to do a series of paper paintings, mixed media paintings on paper, and ceramics to match, of what I call the Woof heroes. Among them, George Woofington, his wife Martha Woofington, and I tried to choose an appropriate creature for each of them that would show their spirit. I mean, Chief Sitting Wolf has a buck bison and a bleeding heart. Of course, my biggest art hero is Leonardo da Vinci, because not only his paintings, but the inventions and all those really do thrill me. He did the drawing of the Vitruvian Man. So Wolf became the Wolfus Vitruvius in my portrait of Buffonardo da Vinci, which, by the way, toured in the Crocker Art Museum's Art Arc for a couple of years. The UC Davis Art Department was so vibrant, so exciting. Everyone was enraptured with what they were doing because they knew they were creating a world-renowned art department. There were students, Bruce Nauman among them, who transferred to Davis to study with these people, with Wiley and with Arneson. And the students were quite a roster because, Bruce Nauman was in our seminar, and so was Jerry Wahlberg and Ellen Van Fleet, and the others were Sandra Deepen and Ed Higgins and a few others. Then a year ahead of me was Peter Vandenberg. A couple of years behind me was David Gilhooly and Steve Kaltenbach, and Margaret Dodd came over briefly, and Marilyn Levine, and so we, had quite an exchange of ideas. Whenever somebody with a TV had a program on, and Wiley was in Davis overnight, then we'd all go over there and get beer and munchies, and we'd go over there and we'd try to figure out the lyrics to "I Can't Get No Satisfaction," because we like the Rolling Stones. This is master's class student work in 64 or 65, between those 2 years, and our assignment was, of course, a self-portrait. So this incorporates all the styles of painting that various instructors at UC Davis kind of accentuated, and yet, maybe there's a personal touch, but, it's certainly done in the expressionist handling of the paint. I guess I didn't have noses, Pat. I still probably don't. I had this drawing I did, and it was 10-tongued whale. And I thought, gee, that would really be, nice to see three-dimensional. And so actually I mentioned it to Bill Wiley. And he said, oh, well, we'll go down to TB9 and Bob will be happy to show you. Robert Arneson was very, very helpful to me in how to work with clay. And he would be very kind and mention things like, don't get it too wet or something. I personally lucked out in that while at Davis, Adeliza McHugh opened her gallery, the candy store, and she went to Arneson, and he loved Adeliza dearly till he died, but he was so surprised that this grandmotherly little woman came over and asked for some art for her gallery. So he gave her what he thought was really gross stuff. And she came back and asked if she could have more. And so Arneson told those of us that we all palled around and stuff, but Gil Hooley and me, and so to check her out. And my experience was just kind of, didn't even have to carry them up there and do an audition kind of thing. She just looked at my little bag of things and she said, I'll take them all. I had started showing at the candy store in 1965 when I got my master's, and I would have a show every year, and Adeliza would do the classy thing. She would get the motel room. The motel was behind the Folsom bowling alley, and David, Zach, and I would bring up the work for the show and hang it so that we would be there first Sunday afternoon opening. This was when I drew for my show of paintings at the candy store sometime in the 60s. These are crocodile-topped giraffes that compose the candy store edifice. And then in these are in Beast versions of me and David Zach and Adeliza, and of course the woofer is there. Now this is Grant Woofed. That is the ceramic version of Wolf World's equivalent of Grant Wood, the fine painter. And this is Grant's Good Guernsey. And because Grant Woofed lived in Illinois and Iowa and all that stuff, he's corny, so she's got cornflowers. And of course, there's doggies in the shape of the patterning on the Guernsey. My first husband, David Zach, taught English at the San Francisco Art Institute. Allen Ginsberg, Ferlinghetti, and Peter Orlovsky and that whole bunch would party around with the Art Institute crowd when they were in town. And of course met Roy DeForest, and Roy did not like the term funk. He, as a matter of fact, he and David Zach and I and Jerry Gooch and a few other people collaborated on the Nut Art Manifesto, because we were going to call ourselves nut artists. But mainly we talked about art being the kernel. David Zach was very erudite. He played the cello. His father was conductor, symphony conductor. We traveled widely. We read widely. We went to musicals. We saw Lightnin' Hopkins. He was pretty special. It was was very exciting because we were young, and you know, as a teacher, we could travel in the summers, and my parents, in the Latvian tradition, kind of did a dowry thing. So my folks gave us $5,000, and we could at least put a down payment on the house. And we looked and we looked and we looked and we looked, and we needed something fairly large. And there was a 3-story Victorian on Steiner Street, 908 Steiner, that was semi-boarded up, but not destroyed. You know, bare bulbs hanging from the ceilings and peeling wallpaper, but it was $17,000. The redevelopment agency gave a couple of options on the exterior painting of the house. And that did not meet with me because I'm not a beige person. And so I knew that I was going to paint the ceilings because I had just loved, every time I've been to Europe, the painted ceilings. I figured that, no, that's what I'd do on the interior, and the exterior would just, you know, be painted white, and then the facade would paint in color. And I had a friend in a marine supply store, so we got marine enamel. We hired painters, we hired scaffolding, and you know, it was primed and painted white all over. Now came the color. And so I was starting to paint the trim various colors, and you know, people would offer to help. And so I would hand them a coffee tin full and a brush full of a color and said, well, paint it, but never beside itself. And so that the facade was actually almost a group effort that I was directing. There was someone who actually accused me of being the first hippie, and that was because I painted the facade of the house. And I thought it was an insult at first, but you know, why not? It was kind of exciting, and it came to kind of be a place that everyone would gather, and guys from Davis and from the Art Institute would troop their classes through while it was a work in progress. This was done by David Gilhooly in the 60s, and it depicts me and David Zach and Woof W. Woof and Funka W. Puss and the crocodile that Gilhooly made for my 25th birthday, fiberglass crocodile. The Rainbow House period was very, very exciting because it became a place that a lot of avant-garde artists, you know, came trooping through and brought their friends. Clayton Bailey was a good friend of S. Clay Wilson's, the cartoonist. S. Clay brought over Robert Crumb. Oh yes, I had my studio down in the thing because I did actually do shows at the Hanson Fuller Gallery and La Jolla Museum. It's been restored to full Victorian except for one ceiling, the Beast slogan ceiling, which is myself and David Zach and a couple of our friends riding in Beastmobiles, and we are all saying fun things in Beast lettering like "Woofers of the world unite" and "Joie de woof." Woofiness is next to godliness. Good stuff. In the woof world, there is always a hero worship among everyone, and so everyone is a hero to the other one, as with Woof W. Woof, who was never critical, who forgave everything because he responded to me and to the people that I knew and loved. And I think that that is a very difficult quality to maintain. And in this world, it's almost impossible because there are just some people you cannot relate to, and there's some creatures you cannot relate to. But in the wolf world, everyone relates positively to everyone else and balances. The early heroes were beast heroes, you know, because beast was then. And then a wolf was a dachshund, long-haired dachshund, and something else mixed. With that animal, I had a rapport that it trusted me no matter what I did. It was proud of me no matter what I did. And I think the same is true for heroes. David Zach got a teaching job out in Italy. And we thought this would be great. You know, we'll see Europe, this, that, and the other, which we did. And unfortunately, that didn't work out as a rehire. So David Zach found work at the University of Saskatchewan in Regina, Saskatchewan, Canada. And we actually did. We took the Fiat van that we had for touring around with the students on one of the ships. And we left from Liverpool, loaded the van on there, and got a small cabin, and we came over to Toronto. And then we drove across to Regina. I found that Dave Zach and I had to part ways, and so I packed my dog in my bag and left him in Regina, Saskatchewan. When I returned from Canada with my suitcase and my dog, Adeliza helped me out tremendously on a personal scale by letting me sleep at the candy store while I was looking for a place of employment and of residence for myself and my dog, Woof W. Woof. And it was so wonderful that I slept there, and she would come in the morning and she'd bring bread and coffee and stuff, and then we'd sit and have dinner on the window seat. While in New York, Adeliza had, with Vincent McHugh, of course, visited all the museums and the galleries and the antique shops. And one of my favorite stories is that when she told me how she learned that she had the eye, because Vincent McHugh was, of course, interested in antique books and things. So they'd been in this antique and whatnot shop. And, you know, being a nice husband, he'd asked Adeliza if there's anything she wanted in that shop. And she had pointed to two little watercolors way up above the counter up there. And Vincent McHugh had turned to her and he said, "Now you've found your own eye. Those are Winslow Homer's." So Adeliza was divorced, and her sister, Edna Williams, lived in Sacramento and had a real estate license. So Adeliza was looking for a place that she could open and perhaps get her sister to help, where they could make their mother's famous almond nougat candy. Anyway, they opened up as the candy store and made almond nougat candy from scratch, shelling the almonds, all this stuff. But then the health department came wandering in. "Oh my gosh, you gotta have this, you gotta have that, you gotta have, you know, a gazillion tools, you gotta, you know, wear masks and gloves and blah, 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 blah." And so Adeliza decided that that was not for her. So she did the smart thing, and she went to the universities and the colleges and found artists whose work she liked. And of course, it mushroomed. I mean, Arneson would bring in people that he thought they'd enjoy, you know, like Luis Cruz Saceda. And Well, Clayton Bailey actually came out to California from Vermilion, South Dakota. This was taken in 1987 during my exhibit at the Candy Store Gallery. And in the center is the spirit and guiding light behind the candy store, Adeliza McHugh in the wicker chair. And beside her are myself kneeling, Peter Vandenberg kneeling, David Gilhooly standing next to my painting of Life is Just a Bowl of Terry Year's Punch Bowl, Robert Arneson in the middle, and Roy DeForest beside him. I'm so thrilled that I have this record of the people that were the principals at the candy store. I've really been so fortunate to have known such tremendous artists on what I thought was a one-on-one relationship. I got a job at Sierra College, again through a friend who had been through Rainbow House, as a student of Roy's, Robert Ridley. And so I taught evening courses there and was in my little house in Folsom. That was my garage/studio. You know, I have that painting still here, and it was the title of a show of mine a couple of years ago at SMUD. It's to my mind that art should be a thing that one can both have in the physical sense, but also retain in one's mindset and get an uplift and a more joyous reaction. Beasties are combination animals, and my early ones were a little more grotesque, I believe. I actually started out as parts of people and parts of animals, and then I evolved into a beastie, which was always a combination of absurd animals and, you know, crocodile-topped giraffes. Or if I wanted to do beast figures, there was the element of a landscape and a figure. And I have always been intrigued by giving the idea of a place and the sense of being in another space. I went to kind of babysit my parents' house while they were visiting. And while there, I met across the fence my next husband, Earl Peoples. And he came over and he claimed this painting for his own. He was just in love with that little painting. And so this has never been shown or been up for sale, but it's Flamingo Flames. The one here is, of course, kind of a memorial that was done the year that I and Earl put Woof down. And again, it uses the flamingo flames, and he is just rising in the flamingo flames. This is Peacock Peaks. And this, I believe, would be about 1969. And it was in a traveling exhibit that was curated and moved around the state of Arizona by the Arizona Arts Commission, titled The World of Woof. What I try to do in my work is give a sense of the spirit of a time and a creature. And I choose my creatures for various reasons, sometimes just because the pattern is so cool on spotted cats. Some things I don't even perhaps wish to explain to myself. But the landscape and the world is important, and I try to give the sense of place once I have seen it. And at times I wish to use figures, human form, and I have in the past tried to do them all doing happy things, and I will continue to do that. I like texture. I like the painting to be tactile. It's fun that, you know, after all these years, this paint is drying and it's kind of wrinkling in and of itself, which I just find these observations fun. This is done with a brush, and I twirl the brush around in very viscous paint and then pull back. And it is a way of outlining the landscape, and it's also a way that, though everyone in this painting and most paintings of mine has a smile on their face, they are, after all, wild and you know, sometimes carnivorous, like lions, creatures, and they will bite. And so that's my way of saying that if you punch on these really, really hard, and yes, sometimes if you don't put spacers, if you brush against this, you can get well scratched, because I've done it. Sometimes I'll use a palette knife, sometimes I'll use a knife, sometimes I'll use a fork, because it's just fun for me. I do love to create, whether it's, you know, in just about anything. I'm always trying to do something, and I like to embellish everything. I like to paint my shirts, and I take very seriously what I paint on my shoes. Today we have two yellow dogs that are facing opposite directions with their tongues out, with a pink crocodile on one side and an elephant on the other side. I work on the level of the composition the way I want it. I have usually picked the creatures or the landscape, or both, or neither, or just a wild idea, or something, a line from a song. And I do, you know, look at a blank surface, sometimes the ceiling, especially if I'm in bed, and I can, or the floor, if there's formats in it, or just a sheet of paper. And yes, there are times when I will sketch out the basic composition of you know, the landscape shapes. This is called Puppy Love, and it is portraits of our two corgi dogs, Reggae the dog, she was female, and Tommy the dog. And this is, of course, the love corgi with a rainbow. I've often wanted to get out of the rectangle or the square, you know, to do varied shaped canvases. This was of the love series, and we'd have to take it off the wall to find the exact title, but I would say it's probably like Splendoed Love or something, because there's a doe in here. Salamander Samurai is 1975, and this was part of a you know, animal people series, and it included gator gondoliers and sheep sheiks and buffalo ballerinas and squirrel squaws and, oh, I can't remember, a lot of them, but they were all figurative and animal. This is 1973, and it's titled Hog Hotel Down at the End of Lonely Street, and it's acrylic on canvas. And this was kind of my period of buildings and objects in animal. And It included the doorman and the lounge piano player and the big pink piggy door. And this is a penguinpede, because there was a series that I did that I thought would be cool, you know, following up on the term centipede. But you know, why not have a lot of animals that have lots and lots of feet? This one is on Baltic birch. This is 2005. And this was actually shown in the Canadian Clay and Glass Museum in Waterloo, Ontario. This is a penguinpede and a cockcat and a corgi. And this was an interim piece because I had just finished with the Wolf Hero series, but I was trying to figure out how to milk one last thing, so they're still citing Napoleon. That one is the painting version of Contagious Laughter, which is the only ceramic of mine that the Crocker Museum has. And this was done in the part of the Laughter series when Earl was in remission, and this is the only one that includes our portraits. This is Life is Just a Bowl of Terriers, #2. This smaller version has been shown at the candy store, and it was part of the song title series. Next to it is one I'm really quite proud of from the early 80s, called The Jaguar Jasper with Jacana Jockeys and Jasmine. And I really got a kick out of all those spots. And this one must have something to do with hounds, because we've got hounds up on top. But I always liked my gladioli with cardinals in them. But this is probably early 90s. Oh, that's dragonflies. And the fur is coming off of the frame. Rats. It's got some flying snails and dragons, of course. They are supposedly sheiks, and they're on seahorse horses, and the critters are shamrocks. And that's 1977, when I had the whole series of people. This here is a corgi castle, and this is a eagle owl with violets, and this is a parrot poodle. Anyway, what I thought was cool was when I found this spot here that we don't use for bathroomy things, how the reflections off the mirror showed their backsides. This is buck boars, and it was painted in '74, and it was over our bed, Earl's and my bed, in El Dorado Hills. These are just small plaques, and I do enough to fill the kiln. And this is just a nice, one of my ceramic items that, again, can be easily transferred. It isn't like a large sculpture or something, and it's a ceramic wall piece. And this one is actually one of the first few figurative ones I've done, and it is, of course, myself and Bill. And, of course, this one and many of the ones here features a pineapple palm. And yes, there's a corgi. And yes, he will actually come out orange, because that glaze is called Wildfire. The worst part is when you have one like this Wildfire, because I have actually been known to not realize there's a glaze there, and I put some other glaze over it, because it looks very much like the raw clay. And I forget. But then it's fun. It comes out kind of weirdo colors, especially if I put a blue over it or something. We've decided there's no mistakes in art, so it'll just be a new and different surprise, right? Luis Cruz Ceseda was I think, a guest instructor at UC Davis or something, but he is a renowned artist in New York and showed at Frumpkin, and during one of his shows at the candy store, he had this one, and I thought it was so atypical of anything that he had done, and so I asked if I could have it, and he said yes. The ceramic that is below it is made by a wonderful artist, Tony Natsoulos, of another wonderful artist, Lee Kalvajian. He's a wonderful, wonderful person, and I just thought that this captured the essence of the man, and it is, of course, a very, very fine example of a Tony Natsoulos figure. These are spirit houses by Lee Kalvajian, and these were a recent purchase because I just saw this and I thought it was so wonderful with the moon, which is, creates the tears of the Amazon, and of course the boat with the cows, and the other side. And spirit houses. I mean, what a wonderful idea. Is a David Gilhooly fucking frog cup. This is a David Gilhooly teapot. Totally non-functional. But it's also not too atypical of what other students at UC Davis ceramics department were doing at the time. They were pushing the pot because Arneson did not allow them to throw pretty pots. This is a elephant's head trophy by David Gilhooly, done in the late 60s, probably 67 or so. I met Clayton and Betty Bailey at a New Year's Eve party that that David Zach and I were hosting at Rainbow House. And Clayton Bailey had come from Vermilion, South Dakota to replace Bob Arneson while Bob was on sabbatical in Europe. This is a Victor Sikansky decanter. Victor Sikansky is a fine Canadian artist, but he studied at UC Davis, and Arneson brought him and a batch of the class over to Rainbow House, and we became friends. This is another famous Canadian artist. That's Joseph Fafard. And this is a dead cow. And Joe has a great many stories of what Canadian winters were like when he was growing up. The school bus was a sleigh with a stove in it, and after the thaw, there were all these cows with trees sticking out of them. And this is the world up there. This is a Robert Arneson plate, and again, I chose this one because it is an unusual plate for Bob, that it captures that landscape so beautifully and so skillfully. I just thought that was such a beautiful and unusual Robert Arneson. This is a piece by Jim Nutt, and it was done while he and his wife Gladys Nielsen and their son Claude were in Sacramento because Jim was teaching at Sac State. And they, of course, both exhibited at the candy store. And this one is titled A Shady Lady, Cast for the Part. This is by Roy DeForest. And I of course think of it as the big-hearted dog. But Roy brought that over to Rainbow House after the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art rental gallery was done with it. Roy liked working with, I guess, his woodworking tools and whittling and that kind of thing. And And he did quite a number of them, but this one ended up being brought to me at Rainbow House. And it has gone with me wherever I have been. Like all art should be, it's, to this day, from 1966 or thereabouts when he brought it over, there's something new in it. Roy always had dogs, and I think at one time Roy had 3. But at the time this was painted, he only had the one dog. And I guess that's a tale of how Roy could quickly and yet so succinctly depict that his dog had a crossed out heart and was looking daggers while behind a very pretty floral landscape. But Roy brought that one over to me because in my small house in Folsom, that was about the size of work that could hang out there. Luis Jimenez showed at the candy store, and he brought in major pieces, including a fiberglass sculpture of his father that was titled Sodbuster in the same uniform. And to this day, I can't figure out how he got it in through the doors. But this was the poster that he drew for his solo exhibit at the candy store. And this is Ed Higgins, or Edward L. Higgins, and he was at UC Davis at the time that I was a student there, and he was a very good friend of Robert Arneson's. This is a little folder that was sent out by Adeliza and her sisters to oil companies in I guess it was the 70s when there was this oil embargo and stuff, because their father had been what was known as a practical geologist, and Adeliza had transcribed from a conversation with her father, William Sorensen, before his death, of how to find oil in the area around St. George, Utah, where their ranch was. And they had held leases on this land because of their father's judgment. But this little folder was what was sent out. This is the originals that I drew and printed the notes on. Anyway, I drew and with my crow quill pen inked out the lettering of the father's notes. And this is the latest bronze that I have ever done so far, and this was done in 1999, mid-year, when Earl Peoples was finally placed into hospice. And so we scurried around and we arranged memorial service plans and whatnot, and what to put his ashes in. So I said, I will create a bronze. And I told Earl that he would be better off than the pharaohs, because he wouldn't see in our bedroom where his remains would be. And so I made my lost wax, the wax thing, and I have this cast at Art Foundry. And it is, of course, Flamingo Flames, which is the subject of Earl's favorite painting of mine in the 70s. And we've got Wolf, and we've got our favorite flower, the iris. I've known Bill since I married Earl, because they were best friends, those two gents. And when Bill and I got married, we each had a household. We came with all kinds of equipment that was different. I came with easels and kiln and, pots, pans, utensils, lamps, chairs, etc. Bill came with that, plus woodworking equipment, plus, of course, specific gadgets for specific tasks, which he is involved in many of: stereo equipment, electronics, computer, stuff like that. Bill and I decided that since we could do none of these things and this place is overflowing and, we can't really find a spot to put something on without moving something else, then we were going to get this house. So we purchased the lot. And Bill found some plans on the internet, and then we decided how we were going to use this. And so it is going to be a very moderate living quarters on the second floor with a kitchen, a small living room, dining area, bedroom, and a one-story elevator, and a very, very large, long space that is fronted as a garage but goes through both ends for Bill's workshop, and then a separate building for my studio, which has an RV garage as part of it that is, of course, sheetrocked and air-conditioned. But that will be my studio. This here painting was done by my uncle Leonids Slaucitais, who was a geophysicist. And when we, as refugees, moved around, he and his family went to Argentina. And he taught geophysics at the University of La Plata. And in 1950s, he was chosen to lead the Argentinian expedition to the South Pole for the International Geophysical Year. And while there, of course, as people, in educated people in Eastern Europe, he had taken art lessons. So while he was doing his measurements and whatnot, he also did a few paintings. And he sent me that because he always, liked me. And so that was at I and my parents' house since the 50s. We had just attended the bullfights because we were, curious art students. I got home and I kind of sketched this little bull, and so since this was to be handed in as an assignment, it should be framed and ready to go on a wall. So I just stuck them in this old frame and handed it in. Actually, I think that one of the people going through the little display thought she hated it, but that was kind of at that point in time. I was complimented by that, but I think I still would be. I would rather hear I hate it, or I love it, or some constructive criticism. I would hate to be an artist that creates stuff that everybody just feels, oh, that's okay, because you want a reaction. This here is truly a treasure. It is an announcement for William T. Wiley's exhibit of Columbus Rerouted in 1964 at the Stempfli Gallery in New York. And this show he was shipping, and he gave me the poster. This is the announcement. And because there's pyramids, it folds up and stands up like a pyramid. William T. Wiley showed his minor work at the candy store, such as lithographs and prints of other ilk. And this was shown, and this one is number 24 of 40. And it just, it was so wonderful in the belly of the feast. I mean, what wonderful little things that because he was teaching at Davis, the outline of the pig with a brush on his nose that's painting on the brush there and holding a little ticket with some words, and this is another, you know, beast of some kind with that head. Wiley had enthused me so much with sharing books from his library, commenting on my art, and just introducing me to this wonderful world that I'm still enraptured with, and probably will be till I am no longer me. Art is food for the soul, almost as good as sex. Maybe too much philosophizing.